Redlining is an illegal 1930s-era policy that still impacts communities here in West Michigan. The practice, encouraged by the federal government, graded neighborhoods depending on how risky mortgages were thought to be in those areas. But that risk was often based on the race of the people who lived there. 13 on Your Side's Josh Alberta spent weeks talking to experts and community members about the history behind it, the impacts, and how some are working to fight them.
Owning a home can pave the way to the American dream, but for many, that path has a long and at times dark history.
I grew up in part of a community that was only designated, for a certain group of people, and I grew up in the integration phase. In the past, when it was legal to discriminate on where people lived, it was yet another part of our history where we've had to overcome challenges based on land use.
It was called redlining.
The term was actually originally popularized in the 1960s by civil rights activists, housing rights activists, when they were fighting against discriminatory behavior by banks and lenders. But more recently, it's become associated with behavior by the federal government in the 1930s.
In the 1930s, as the number of people defaulting on mortgages peaked, cities like Muskegon and Grand Rapids saw their neighborhoods divided up to show where residents may be most or least likely to default. Green for what was considered the safest, and red for what was considered the most risky.
So the Homeowners Loan Corporation, they were created to protect banks because there was a mortgage crisis. Lots of people were defaulting on their mortgages, and the federal government was worried about banks being solvent.
Michigan State University professor Craig Carpenter has been studying these policies and their lasting effects for years. And the reason he said they're now infamous
is because that underwriting manual for how they would decide whether or not a neighborhood was green or red was explicitly racist.
In certain cases, guidelines for risk level were based on simple geography. But the most central reason for determinations, he indicated, was based on who lived there.
In Muskegon, for example, some of the coastal areas were redlined because they were worried about the physical, technological investment and whether or not those houses would be safe over time. And then the central neighborhoods of Muskegon were redline mapped because black people lived there. So you can see they were equating literal physical hazards with where people of color live.
In 1968, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, outlawing racial redlining. But after decades of legal discrimination and disinvestment, experts say its impact remains.
Do we see those kinds of disparities still today?
I still think it exists. Unfortunately, I think it's just maybe a little more subtle, and therefore some people don't realize they're having a difference in treatment.
You have a systemic process leaving people out, and then you have literally property by property leaving people out.
Decades after that, the housing scene of today is something that Liz Keegan has seen up close and personal.
We cover 38 counties. We had over 260 allegations of housing discrimination filed with our Fair Housing Center in 2025.
Their headquarters in Grand Rapids, nestled near multiple historically redlined areas.
To my understanding, this is one of the neighborhoods that we were talking about that was historically redlined back in the 30s to 60s. At least that's what the map suggested to me.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this is one of the redline neighborhoods.
Underinvestment, she explained, can lead to impacts including a lack of generational wealth to pass on.
The ability to own a home and build that wealth for your generations that follow you was denied.
Community services were underinvested in, like schools, health, all of those things, food, deserts, that sort of thing. So it stripped those areas of their wealth and their equity, and so therefore it still impacts the same communities, similar ways.
Some officials want to help right the wrongs of the past.
We're still trying to reverse the impact of inequities in some of the redline conditions by investing more in the southern part of our city, which had been historically marginalized, the Third Ward Equity Fund.
And many hope to educate.
This history is horrible, right? And we know it has long-run effects today. And so we don't want to sugarcoat it and pretend it wasn't that bad, right?
And you can never forget the mistakes that was done in the past, because if you do, we're doomed to repeat them.